The slides you'll see that I use across the next 10 weeks, roughly 18 lectures, maybe 19, depending on whether or not we fit in this last performance. Not my performance, by the way. On the syllabus it says performance, that's you guys. Some of you might have just thought, oh, maybe I should drop this course. One of the things that is characteristic about the slides is there's not a lot of text. There's going to be one slide today with a lot of text because we're going to be quiz on it on Tuesday. But in general, there's not a lot of text. And my hope is that the lectures are engaging enough that you won't find yourself taking notes the whole time either. You'll be wanting to pay attention and ask questions and listen. In any case, taking notes is not, the lectures are not set up for the conventional taking notes approach, which is I put some text on the screen and you write it down. With that in mind, section leaders, TAs, please pay attention. All of you have to volunteer, each of you has to volunteer to take notes for your section colleagues at least once during the quarter. So in section, you guys are going to have to figure out how to have like a sign-up sheet. Does that make sense, section leaders? Right. Each of you is going to have to take notes for your section at least once, which means if you look at the GouchoSpace site, I hope you have, because the reading posted already, it's crappy. If you look at the GouchoSpace site, you'll see that each lecture has its own topic area in the GouchoSpace. So I'm going to ask, so every week, right, every lecture, there's going to be, 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 people taking notes, and you're going to post those notes on GouchoSpace, making it available for your colleagues. This is not so that you don't have to come to class. Right? This is so that as we go forward and we're building off of some of the stuff that happens in lecture, it's just available for you. It's like an archive. It's also, frankly, available to me because it helps me understand what you're walking away with, right? What's available for you after a lecture. Does that make sense? Like, I need to know what you carry out from the room. It makes the lecture better. Right? I hope it makes it better. So you don't have a chance to volunteer right now, right, for this, in your section. So instead of doing it in section, right, today I'm going to ask for 5 volunteers to be the note takers for today. 1. The way you're going to know is you're going to lock eyes, have a meaningful moment. Okay. 1, got it. 2, okay. In the very back row, not in the red sweater. 3, okay. Nice. These people on this side of the room are like, why is he always going to his left? 5, that's it. I like that was good, she was like. My son, who's 3, he's got this thing that he does. We have no idea where he got it, but he goes like this. Good morning, Zeke. After we have a Jedi lightsaber battle, he goes, I don't know what that is. Okay, we're on our way. So, the title of the course is Schooling in the U.S. As you know, when you say school, it's not school in the U.S., it's schooling in the U.S. Even though when I say schooling, most of us think of a school place, right? Schooling not as a process, but school as a place. So we're going to talk about it in those, we're going to use those terms interchangeably, but I just want to point out that there's a distinction. There's school that's a place, right? This is an old-time one-room schoolhouse, right? You never bricks. Anybody go to school that looks something like this? Raise your hand if you did go to school something like this. Oh, I got for hand raised, just so you know, like this. It's like, yeah. Did you go to a school like this? Raise your hand high. Cool, look around. A lot of people, right? What about, anybody go to school like this? Raise your hand. Yeah, most people go to something like this. But this is our iconic school, right? We say school, this is, I mean, if you look at this slide, right, that's that picture. Nobody looks at that picture and goes, what the hell is that? You see a bell, right? You see a building, and it looks a lot like this, right? Old-timey schoolhouse from New England. In some cases, moving a little bit west. The schools in the West, incidentally, didn't look like this. They looked like shacks for a long time. My grandfather went to school in a one-room schoolhouse. It was a shack on a creek, on a ranch, right? But something like this. Anyway, we think about these places, right? But schooling itself is also a process. Whatever happens inside those school buildings. And part of what this course depends upon is a finding, or not just a belief, but a finding that over and over again, whether your school looks like this or your school looks like that, what happens inside those classrooms is amazingly similar from left coast to right coast, urban to rural, Even if the schools look different, even if some schools have desks and not chairs, the kinds of things that count as schooling, right? The schooling practices are pretty close to the same. Not exactly the same, but amazingly similar, given that nobody, the government, first of all, the federal government doesn't have any jurisdiction over public education. Did you know that? That's a nice fact to have. The federal government has money, but not legal jurisdiction over what happens in schools, unless it's a concern about a civil right. Right? Constitutionally, schooling, public education in schools, we call it schooling, is left to the states. Right? Because it's not specified as a federal responsibility, it's a state responsibility. So how is it that No Child Left Behind? You guys are often referred to in education circles as the No Child Left Behind generation. You've gone through school with No Child Left Behind. Was what organized a lot of what happens in classrooms. You know how that works? It's not because if the states don't do No Child Left Behind or don't do that test, it's not that they're going to get put in jail. It's that they're just not going to get federal money. Schooling is amazingly consistent across schools across the nation. Right? You walk in any kindergarten classroom, it's going to be hard once you're in that classroom to know exactly where you are in the nation. Okay. All right. So that's school. And when I say school, and you're gonna see this happening throughout the course, and with a capital S, I mean that thing that we have in common, right? That thing that we share as a kind of experience of being in the U.S. And even if you were in homeschool or unschool or whatever school you did, right? You had an idea that what you were not doing was this, right? So even if what you went through individually was not what lots of other people go through in the course of their schooling experience in the U.S. or wherever else. It's, right? You knew that you were not doing this. So let's just hear from some. So when you say school, how do you know you're in a school and not somewhere else? If you're in a school right now, how do you know? How do you know you're not in church? Yeah.
Everyone around you kind of looks like your age group.
So age consistency, right? You don't see a 4-year-old sitting, right? So people are divided by age. Cool. There's a nice reading on that called age stratification that we have. Yeah, age, yeah. So desks and pencils, and you're supposed to look like you're writing. Have you ever faked it? About school. Have you ever faked taking notes? Just nod your head if you have. Some of you are faking it right now by nodding your head. Yeah, I don't know what you said. But yeah.
There are authority figures.
Authority figures. Am I one?
Yes.
Who else?
Well, like elementary school, middle school, like those like principals or UAPAs and.
Yeah, nice. There's a higher. You guys are authority figures. How do you like that?
Anyone who's higher than you.
Higher than you. And this is nice because in this room I'm physically higher than you. Right? Where's the teacher in a kindergarten classroom? Almost always sitting in a chair when the kids are on the floor. So there's a higher. Okay, cool. What else? What else tells you you're in school? Yeah.
You don't have to purchase your religious stuff.
I didn't understand what you said.
You don't have to purchase your religious stuff.
Oh yeah, in the U.S. there's an effort at least to keep religious stuff out of the classroom, right? To varying degrees, but that's legal. Yeah.
We're only here for a certain amount of time.
A certain amount of time. Some of you would say too long. Did anybody get in high school? Were you in like ASB or leadership and you got to leave at lunch? Nod your heads if you did. Yeah. If you didn't, did you hate those people? Yeah.
There's some etiquette.
Etiquette. What's the etiquette?
Being kind of hanging out, like, not being on your phone, like, for disrespectful to the teacher.
Nice. Oh, and so etiquette. You said not being on your phone. Or if you're on your phone, not getting caught being on your phone. Right? Or if you're writing a note to a friend, not getting caught writing that note to a friend. So the effort's to hide. Doesn't mean that everybody's following the rules, but you can be seen to be knowing you're breaking the rules because you're doing things like this. I teach in the teacher education program, and they say that there's this acronym called SLANT. And then what you want for your students to do is to slant. It's to sit up, lean forward, ask questions, nod your head, and track the speaker. Right? You're laughing. Why did that make you laugh? Totally, man. We do. It takes 2 seconds in a teacher education classroom to say, "Watch, teachers, you guys are all doing this. Can you fake it?" And they all look super interested. Oh yeah. yes, they sit up straight, lean forward, ask questions. Is that what you meant? And nod your head and track the speaker wherever the speaker goes. Unless the speaker is clearly not paying attention, then you go, oh yes. We have video of kids. So when the teacher's not around, the kids are like their voice changes. They talk to kids. This one great, these kindergartners and these two girls and they're fighting over pencils. Someone says, "Why do you take my pencils?" Because I need your pencils. Why do you got to be so mean? You don't even speak in Spanish. Who are you? They're doing this pencil, and the teacher comes over and the student says, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Conboy. We're just drawing." And she has a little French accent. You'll see her on some videos. She goes, "Really good." And she walks on, and the teacher, and they look at each other and they go. Right? So we know we're in school when we try to, in ways, we do things and try to hide it. What is it that we try to hide? Right? We're going to get into what school is in a lot more depth. Because a lot of times what we think school is the building. It's not. School is whatever it is that's going on where when you're in it, you go, I know I'm in a place called school. Where at the end of the day, you go, I went to school today. Right? I didn't go to play soccer. I didn't go wilding in the streets. I didn't go watch a movie. I didn't go read a book. I didn't go write a book. I didn't play a video game. I was in school today. Okay? Now, the thing about school, when we say it, we mean something very specific, right? We're going to define what those practices are later in the course. Right? We're going to find what those processes that we know we're in school. We're going to do that later, but there is a beginning definition: universal, common, public, and compulsory. I'll start. I'm not going to do them in this order because it doesn't feel right today. The bottom one is the one that is especially characteristic and a sort of a very clear historical product. Right? It's characteristic, but it's also a historical product. It's making people go. Right? That is not unique to the U.S., but it's distinctive. Right? There are a lot of places where you don't have to go to school. It's available maybe to you, but you don't have to go. So it's compulsory. When I was a kid, I knew I didn't ditch a lot. Well, I left school a lot because I was, in the group that it was okay to leave school. They didn't call it ditching. They called it, you don't have class this period. But I knew that there was a certain age. In my childhood, I thought it was 16. I have no idea if that's true, but that was the myth. Was that if you get caught on the streets during school hours and you're 16, or you're younger than 16, they're going to take you to juvie or something. I had friends who got stopped and they didn't get taken to juvie, but sometimes they got taken back to school. Now, that was a long time ago for me. It's been a long time since I went to school, since high school, public, just before you were born, probably. 1988, I graduated from high school. Before you were born? Yeah? That's weird. For me. And now, I think there's even more. If I walk into a lot of the schools that you went to, I suspect that there's even more law enforcement presence than there was when I was in school. That wasn't accidental, but there was you had to avoid the guard as you left. That whole process, because the end of the idea, you're supposed to be there. You have to be there. And if you're not there, you've got to account for where you are. Right? You can't just be hanging out. We have words for it: cutting, ditching, anything else that we call it? What is it? What is it? Playing hooky? That sounds so old school. I like that. I'm playing hooky. I'm going to go smoke a doobie. Groovy. Sounds like the beginning of a little rap right there. Yeah, playing hooky, cutting, skipping, all that stuff. Right? Compulsory. That's one feature of schooling in the U.S. is you got to go. Public. Now, public in this case, what I mean is that there's a sense of public responsibility. Right? Those of you who are taking notes, this is stuff to take notes about. The sense of public responsibility, but there's also, it's just a purely dollars and cents, it's publicly funded. Okay? You're paying for it. Or maybe your folks are paying for it. Now, the funding formulas are different state to state. Okay? In California, most states are not like California. Most states, it's a property tax funding. So you pay property. Whoever owns property pays property taxes, and those taxes pay for schools. Right? Funded by the public. If you try to build a new house in California, it works out kind of like that. Some portion of what you have to pay in fees goes to schooling. In California, we also have the lottery. Has anybody ever won the lottery big in this? Actually, don't say that because I don't want you to be subject. The lottery, right? My mom's a lottery fanatic. Every time she does that, some portion of every dollar that she spends on a lottery ticket goes to school. publicly funded, in various ways and methods and formulas, publicly funded. Now this is important for schooling in the US. Why is it important? It's important because it means that anybody can say, I have a say. I'm paying for it. I'm paying for it. Even if it's cents compared to your dollar, I'm paying for it, which means this is not just a rhetoric of citizenship that you should care. It's something that you pay for. Now, I know some of you are like, yeah, I'm paying through the nose for UC. Right? But it's also the case that there's public funding going to UC. But there's a lot more public funding going toward K-12 education. Right? It's much more. You don't have to pay to go to your K-12 school. Now, there's ways around that, of course. Like, you go into a school, we have to buy supplies now in my kids' class. Okay? I pay, in a way, I pay. Right? Privately. I have to pay for something that my daughter gets to do. Now we have to pay for field trips, that kind of thing. But golly, this means that any one of you, and your parents, and your grandparents, and people who sucked at school and did great at school, people have a right, frankly, to walk in and go, I'm paying for this. Public. Not just that we should care about it, we're paying for it. Common. What this means is that there's a common, the subject matter and curricula are generally held in common. So in the state of California, there's only a few, here in public schools, right, there's only a few textbooks you're allowed to use, right, publicly or state approved. Right? So common. That was revolutionary when schools first started getting talked about, public schools. It was actually, they weren't called public schools, they were called common schools. And that was wild, right? We're going to go through some history later on in the course. When Horace Mann in Massachusetts was making in the mid-1800s was making an argument for, wait a second, we should have a common experience. We take that so much for granted now. You went to school, wherever you went to school in the U.S., we have an idea, it's going to be kind of the same. How many, raise your hand if you went to school in California? Excellent, okay. 4th grade? How many of you did a mission project? Raise your hand. Of course you did. 25 years ago, 40 years ago, when I was 35 years ago when I was in 4th grade, I did a mission project. Okay? 5th grade, how many people studied slavery? 5th grade, did you do fractions? Maybe you did some geometry? I haven't been teaching in a classroom for 15 years, and I know, and I don't have to go walk into a 5th grade classroom or 4th grade classroom, I know. Right now, the language of commonality has to do with curriculum. And its founding principles was, wait a second, we got all these people who are so different from all these places in the world, that's actually still the case, all these places in the world speaking all these different languages, we need a common national experience. And the only place we're going to have a common national experience, it's not going to happen in churches, because you go to one church and you go to another. It's not going to happen in the home because you speak one language and you eat some kinds of foods and you speak another, right? It's going to happen as common institution. It was a nation-building exercise. So common is about, we have a common experience when we walk into school. All right. And then, universal. Universal is not the same as compulsory. Universal really means that it's available everywhere, right? Compulsory means you got to go. Universal means that it's anybody can go. These are not the same things. Okay. Universal means you can go, compulsory means you got to go to a certain age. All right, enough about schooling. We're going to talk about this quite a lot more later. Schooling is not the same as education. Note takers, this is important. This next slide, you will be quizzed on Tuesday. You can do it open notes, you can do it open neighbor, you can walk out of the classroom. It's going to be a short quiz. Right? It's going to be, what is Kremen's definition of education? I think this is something you got to know, partly because I want to have to say it every time that we talk about education. Yes?
Did you memorize the quote? Or
No, you can write it down and just copy it off of your notes. Matter of fact, you can do the quiz before I'll tell you what the other question is. There's 2 questions on the quiz. One of them is, what's Kremen's definition of education? And the second one is, prove that education is not the same as schooling. We'll get to that in 2 sentences or less. I'm going to give you the answer today. Don't sweat it. Okay. Here's the definition of education, which is not the same as schooling. Okay? Education is the deliberate, systematic, sustained effort to transmit, evoke, or acquire knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities, and any learning that results from the effort, direct or indirect, intended or unintended. Okay? Smart move. Take a picture of this thing. I'm going to post these slides, by the way. Okay? To not get this, you have to not be here today. Okay. Why is this important? right? Well, let's go through and let's talk about how this is important. Okay, education is first, the deliberate, systematic, and sustained effort. Pay attention to this first line. When we say education, first of all, we don't just mean schooling. It's what we often think of as education. The deliberate, systematic, sustained effort, which means education has to do with trying. Most of you didn't try to learn your first language. You just learned it. There's a whole bunch of stuff you learn without trying. And that doesn't fit. And there's important reasons to do this for this course and onwards. There's important reasons to distinguish between the learning that happens all the time anyway and education, which is the product of deliberate, systematic, sustained effort. We're trying. We're doing it on purpose. That's the way I think about that. Education is the learning that we try to do on purpose. That's that first line. That's just one line. The second line, to transmit, evoke, or acquire. This is super important. Why? Transmit. This is what we mostly think of when we think of education, even if we remember that schooling is not the same as education. It's about transmitting. That is the simplest and most impoverished, frankly, version of what education is. The effort to transmit. That means that education is my responsibility, and it's your only responsibility is to receive. Right? It's good that it comes first because, in fact, in our heads it probably comes first. The most thing we think about education, we think about transmitting. I got something you don't have, I got to get it to you. Transmit, etymologically, means to send across. To send across. You're there, I'm here, sending. Right? It's the same transmit, it's the same root word as mission. To send across, to send across something from me to you. Across some gap. A gap in our space. We've got skin and meat and bones between us, right? But we've also got values, we've got language, transmit. But evoke, how about that? You know what the etymology of evoke is? To call forth, to call out. And for me, the gesture that goes along with evoke is so much different than the gesture for transmit. Transmit is this. Right? That's for me the gesture that accompanies transmit. I have it, take it. There's lots of metaphors we have that have it sound like pouring in, like open up your head and pour the knowledge in. There's a conduit metaphor. A conduit is like what they put electric, it's like a pipe. Conduit metaphor, right? If I can get inside your head, I can transmit. But evoke is different. To call out, that says there's something that you bring that I'm calling forth. To call forth, to call out. That's a very different idea about education. Right? That's right here in the definition that we have. I will say this about Kremen. You've tried this definition of education. If you find yourself saying, I think I already know what education means, why are we spending so much time on it? You know, okay, Kremen spent years trying to figure out a concise enough definition that captures everything that might be included under the term education. Transmit, evoke, and then acquire. What's the gesture for acquire? Can somebody do a gesture that's for acquire? I told you transmit. Look at that. This, there's this. I like that. There's one hand. I can see that. We can start getting a scene here in a minute. But like it's like an embracing or a bringing to oneself. To transmit, evoke, or acquire. And that acquire is so different because it means that you don't need a teacher to be educated. The deliberate, systematic, sustained effort could be yours. Trying to acquire something. Right? Now already, we're 2 lines into this. 2 lines into it, and already we've opened it up beyond school. Raise your hand if you play video games. Excellent. Have you ever gone online and found the cheats? You guys know what that is? Somebody explain what that is. So that I don't have to, because I don't play enough to really know. Yeah.
It's where you go online and there's apps or like code that you put into each of the game while you're running it to get better.
Okay, you put a code. You go online and get codes to make the game go easier, to move forward a level, or skip stuff, or whatever. Cheats. That's like the most basic kind of acquisition. I don't know this one piece of information, and I need to get it, and I'm going to go get it. That's this gesture. I'm going to reach out and grab it. Right? And the fact of the internet, which, you know, you talk to your grandparents if they're still alive, they'll find it miraculous. You won't. The fact that you can just go, I mean, okay, I got my phone. I just look on my search for the last, what's on my Safari on this, right? Where I should, one screen that's here is where I should place the cameras. How long do I cook the beef in my stir fry? The latest review on a pocket knife, there's 2 of those. Road conditions on the road to Big Bear, how much these cottages cost. Another review of a knife, this makes me sound like a knife weird guy. The exact tire size on our minivan. How to attach the bands to a slingshot. What's the font in Sons of Anarchy? 65% off snow gear. We were trying to figure out the Big Bear Zoo, the hours. That there was a 4.5 earthquake north of Castaic. I mean, and then a narwhal. Go in your search history. It's education. It's the simplest version. Right? Simplest in the following way, right? Because it's this part. It's the first word. The nice thing is for Kremen, every first word of every line is the default position, right? Transmit, that's what we usually think of, and knowledge is what we usually think of, right? It's the easiest one. Knowledge, and most of what we talk about when we talk about knowledge is information. If I were to change Kremen's definition, I would just say information. Right? Knowledge. So you go out and acquire it, you don't need a teacher, right? In fact, a teacher would probably get in the way because you have a question that you need answering, and you just go out and get it. Attitudes. Now this is where it gets complicated. Or it gets interesting, maybe. And then this one is one that we're going to talk about today. Do I have it? Oh, I don't. I thought I was looking for a laser pointer someplace in here. I did. Oh, wait. Ooh, look. Ooh. I have the coolest laser pointer. You should come to my house. It looks like a 300-foot high, tiny lightsaber that you can use to point out constellations in the sky. Okay. Go on Amazon and get one. It is the coolest thing I own. Way cooler than this. So knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities. Now we're going to go into this in some more detail, but the idea is what's getting learned, right? When we talk about education, education involves more than just knowledge, right? Attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities. Now because we're going to spend more time on this, I'll skip this. The idea here, the basic idea here, is that it's not just information. Usually when we talk about education or even learning, we mostly limit it to information. Right? That's the Safari. The search is on my phone. But education can and sometimes does intentionally involve the education of values, right? Skills, how to do something. I mean, some of that's skill too, right? How do I cook that stir fry so the meat doesn't taste like leather? It did anyway, no matter how much I read. I didn't have this. I had the information, but not the skill. That's interesting. Sensibilities. Now, the only thing I'll say more about sensibilities is I want you to think about your senses, right? What you pick up. That's what I think he means by sensibilities. Like what you pick up on, what you notice, right? And then finally, any learning that results from the effort. And this gets us to the third part of this first part of the lecture. Any learning that results from the effort, direct or indirect, intended or unintended. Now let's look back to the top. Deliberate, systematic, sustained effort is intentional. But when we talk about education, it's not just the effort, it's the learning. This is where it says and. So think about this definition in a couple of parts, right? This as the first part, and this as the second, and any learning. So it's the effort and the result, the try and the get. And what's important about this last part is that when we talk about education, he's demanding of us that we not only think about, did we get the thing we intended? Did we transmit, evoke, or acquire the thing we intended to transmit, evoke, or acquire? But also to consider what else got learned. So I might intend to transmit a skill to you. Anybody ever take piano? Raise your hand if you took piano. Yeah, me too. But I also learned that my piano teacher was a terrible person. I learned to hate piano. I could play it, but I had a kind of value. So I also learned I learned something about her. I didn't like her. I learned something about myself. I didn't like my piano teacher. Or maybe I liked her, but I didn't like having to go to the lesson. But even as I learned the skill of plinking out chopsticks, right? I learned something else too. And I don't think she intended for me to learn to not want to take the, right? To not want. The education in this case, it was desire. I wish desire was up here. Maybe that's part of value. Transmitting, evoke, acquire desire. I learned to not like it. I learned to not want it. How many people in here have said or thought about themselves, and this one you have to raise your hand high, I am not a math person. Raise your hand. Did anybody? I would bet that, look around, keep in mind, look around. You might have thought you were alone. That's crazy. How are you not a math person? For some of you, you had some person in authority, some authority figure, maybe standing up high, say to you, maybe math is not your thing. But I bet for most of you, you didn't have a person telling you. You just figured that out. In the course of somebody trying to transmit a bunch of math information to you, you also learned that you're not a math person. Before we go on, I just want to say, if there's anything else you get from today, I want you to appreciate how stupid that is. What makes you think you're not a math person? Because you didn't get it when you tried it? Because you got a bad score on some test? Because the teacher tried and it didn't work? Because you tried and it didn't work? To think about how ridiculous it is that you're not a math person. To say you're not a math person, first of all, you have to presume that some brains are mathematical brains and other brains aren't. And I just think that there's no evidence for that. When my kid is learning to walk, she doesn't one day stand up and be like, what? Right? Have you seen a little kid learn how to walk? They don't learn how to walk. First, they learn how to right? And then they take a couple steps and the room erupts, yay! But they don't go then running, they go, yay! And the kid goes. And at that moment in that child's life, you don't go, maybe he's not a walking kid. So you learned you're not a math person, even though for most of you it was never taught to you. That was an unintentional, probably indirect, probably frankly wrong, misguided knowledge about yourself. I'm just not a math person. It's definition of education. Deliberate, systematic, sustained effort to transmit, evoke, or acquire knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities. And, part two, any learning that results. Direct or indirect, intended or unintended. So when we talk about education in school, which is what this course is about, right, we've got to account for the learning that results from what we do in school. Direct or indirect, intended or unintended. But there's that word learning. So school is not the same as education. Education is not the same as learning. Even if we need learning to talk about education, and we assume what's happening in school is a deliberate, systematic, sustained effort to do something educational. All right, so I'm going to give you 3 different versions. That's not just knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, and sensibilities. 3 other options for what we might mean when we talk about what's learned. This comes from Twyla Tharp, very famous dancer and choreographer. This comes from her book called, I think it's called The Creative Habit. I'm not sure if you remember. This is what she says: when I walk into a white room, I am alone with my, right? So even a white, empty room. Before we even go on to the stuff in red, maybe that's the right way. Not maybe. It is the right way into thinking about learning. Not just what's testable, but learning as a way to talk about whatever you bring from one place or scene to the next. even if it's a white room with nothing in it. That is, what do you bring from what the note takers write that down? The way in to talk about learning is to talk and think about it as whatever it is that you bring with you from one situation to the next. Right? To carry with you from situation to situation. And she says this, I am alone with my body, ambition, ideas, passions, needs, memories, goals, prejudices, distractions, fear. You can imagine the list gets longer. This is another version of what? Knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, sensibilities. Right? It's not just information. In fact, she doesn't have information there at all. This might be all about the values or something. Or sensibilities, body, ambition, ideas, passions, needs, memories, goals, prejudices, distractions, fear, and all of this got learned. You're not born, sure you're born with the body, but the minute that you're conceived, right? Who knows what the starting point is? We won't have that discussion here. Whatever the starting point is, your body's learning. Your body is responding to the environment, right? Those of you who are great athletes, your bodies often do whatever they're supposed to do without you even thinking. Your bodies have learned. Jose Saramago, who's a Nobel Prize-winning author, in a book called The Cave, he talks about a potter doing pottery, right? And the potter talks about having little brains in each of his joints and his fingers, right? That's kind of how it works. Your body is a vessel. Your body is a way to think about learning. It doesn't feel quite right. Let's go on. Ambition, ideas, passions, needs, memories, goals, prejudices, distractions, fear. And for her, these 10 items are at the heart of who she is. Whatever I'm going to create will be a reflection of how these have shaped my life. You're not going to get tested on this. The big part is the part in red. And frankly, I don't care if you can ever repeat the stuff that's in red. I just want you to know that it's another cut, another version of knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, sensibilities. You can do it by body part, right? Knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, sensibilities, body, ambition, etc., prejudices, Esquire Tharp. Mind, body, spirit, heart. You've heard of that. Anybody wear ASICS running shoes? Raise your hand if you wear ASICS. Yeah, you know what ASICS stands for, right? It's Latin for sound mind and sound body. Even running shoes have got it out. Got it figured out, right? Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Mind, body, spirit, heart is another way at it, and the way that I find the most useful, you do not have to take this on, is by activity, right? I can think about what I carry from one situation or scene to the next in terms of what I see, what I think, what I do, what I say, what I make, what I believe. Not just what I see, think, do, say, make, and believe, but what I can see, think, do, say, make, believe. What I tend to see, think, do, say, make, believe. What I want to think, right? So, quick review. Knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities. When we talk about learning. Okay? Not the same as schooling versus education. You can do it this way, you can do it that way, or you can do it this way. I want you to spend 5 minutes, quietly writing, describing what you have learned that got you from your front door to the seat you're sitting in this morning. What did you have to know? What did you have to think, do, say, see, make, just to get from your front door to class? Yeah. How to navigate bike traffic. I witnessed an accident yesterday which at least one person hadn't yet figured that out. How to navigate bike traffic. So that's a skill, right? What else? Let's hear a few more, yeah? How to drive a car. Woo! There's a lot more in that even, right? It's like how to drive, we could do a whole multiple lecture series on how to drive a car. Did you ever do that thing in school where you had to write directions for how to make a peanut butter sandwich or something? Right? And the person doing it intentionally got it totally wrong. You're like, oh, my directions suck. But right, even inside these little things, it's dense. Yeah. How many snoozes? That's so great. Like, why not just set your alarm for the right time? Because you're like, that snooze is awesome. Yeah. What else? How many snoozes? That's even before you leave the front door, yeah. How to open the door. Anybody in here ever take a door opening class? Seriously, anybody? No. So you learned, but you learned it, right? Man, just watch a kid who doesn't know how. Watch parents try to make it harder for the kid after they figure out how. Right? Yeah. As fast, do you skip steps? Yeah. Does anybody just go? Who's this? Any fellow step skippers in here when you go downstairs? Super sketchy. What about? Are there the rapid fire? Anybody that? Yeah. Anybody with a banister? Like I'm going to hold onto the banister and leap. Right? Yeah. Right. So it depends on how many snoozes you got. Yeah. How to prepare for class, and what really preparation means. Some of you are also still trying to figure that out. Did we really have to do the reading? We haven't had a quiz on it. What to wear depending on the weather? Yeah. Yeah, seating selection. And for you it might be taking good notes. Other people it might be where can I sit so I won't get caught shopping on Etsy or whatever you can do. Yeah. Which entrance gets you into the class? Fantastic. I desperately had to use the bathroom when I got to campus today. And I know where the good bathrooms are. Anybody else know where they are? In the student resource building on the first floor, there's a family restroom. It's fantastic. Ladies, you have the bottom floor of the USEN. Fellas, take a peek in there without being obscene. It is awesome. So you learn a bunch of information, but inside any one of these, we could unpack any one of these and find an almost infinite number of things that we have learned if we start with our bodies, how to move, how not to fall down, how much pressure to put on a doorknob so that it turns but you're not gripping it, how much you need, all that stuff. That's all stuff that you've learned. You're learning, start this way. I find nothing more miraculous in the world. And miracle in this sense meaning not only a sense of wonder, but of mystery. Then the human, voracious, aggressive, omnivorous, the words I have are all like consuming capacity to learn. We are learning all the time. There is no off switch. We can't say, I'm going to stop learning now. Because even if we say that, the world doesn't stop around us. So the world is constantly giving us new messages that our voracious, omnivorous, aggressive minds and bodies and hearts and spirits are trying to put together. Even if what you think is you're just going through your everyday routine, what your body and mind and heart and spirit are learning is that everything's going according to plan. You might think that you're not learning anything when you walk into an elevator and everything goes roughly like you expect. Nobody makes direct eye contact with you. People have a respectful distance. Everybody's facing forward. There's maybe a small greeting. You may think you're learning nothing, except that every time that happens, you're learning once again that this is what happens in elevators. Learning doesn't get turned off. We are learning all the time. Big point number one. I'm going to make 3 points about learning that are the basis for this entire course. One is we're learning all the time. That's the first one. The story that I tell other people as well as myself about that is this. We don't turn it off. We're learning all the time. And this is my story. My oldest daughter, Lilia, went to childcare here at Orphala over here on campus. She walks in and she's 3, maybe she was 2, I think she was probably 2. This is sitting on a table, this very thing. I swiped it that day. It was such a cool moment. I took a picture and then I swiped it. It was sitting just like this on the table. And she looks and she says, "Daddy, what's that?" And me being the teacher, I said, "I don't know. What do you think?" I didn't say I don't know. I probably did say I don't know. So I lied to start with. And yeah, sorry. And I said, "I don't know. What do you think it is?" And she said, she looks at it and she goes, "It's a spider." I said, "What makes you say it's a spider?" Look, it's got all these legs. You know, part of me that's like a nature guy was like, "But how many legs do spiders have?" I didn't do that. And I said, "So you think it's a spider?" And she goes, "It also looks like a duck." Anybody see it? Which part looks like a duck? The tail. I never would have seen that at all, except when my daughter said it looks like a duck. And I laughed. I remember clearly, it was one of these moments you have with children, and I laughed and I said, "Miha, it does look like a duck." And she goes, "Ha, it's a spider duck." Now some of you right now are saying, "I hope he corrected her." I didn't need to, because I just laughed. Because the fact of the matter is, at some point, she doesn't need to be corrected every time she gets it wrong, because at some point somebody's going to say, "Look at that scorpion." And her brain, whether or not she needed to, is going to go, "Duh. I thought it was a spider duck." She said a scorpion. And maybe she says, "What was that you said?" And they say, "It's a scorpion." He says, "Oh, okay. Not a spider duck." It doesn't matter if anybody corrects her. The point is, she's doing this all the time, and so is every one of us. Taking in information and making connections, right? Making sense. We are a bag of just a bag of water with some protein and some electrical charges and a little bit of minerals to keep us from falling over. And yet all the time we are making sense of a world that is bombarding us, a world teeming with information. And we're making sense of it with our minds. How does this work? With our hearts, what does this feel like? With our bodies, what do I do? With our spirit, where does this take me? And then we go into the next moment carrying whatever it is, even if it's just questions and hypotheses with us. And this happens all the time. The stories, once you have children, if you don't already have children, the stories that my other daughter found, she says, she points to her, she says, "This really hurts." And I said, "What hurts?" Mihan, she looks down, she goes, "My leg wrist." Leg wrist. Arm, wrist, leg, wrist. I know that it's not a wrist, so I've got, she's 6 now, she doesn't walk around going, "I sprained my leg wrist today." She says ankle. It's happening all the time. We don't turn it off. We are always learning. And point number 2, we are always learning more than one thing at a time. We're always learning, but we're always learning more than one thing at a time. Even if this is a class about schooling, you're learning a whole lot of other stuff too. Even if it's just about how to stir fry the top sirloin and not make it feel like leather in my mouth, I'm learning a bunch of other stuff too. Even if I'm trying to teach what 2 + 2 is and how that works, other stuff's getting learned too. Even if I just want to learn how to blink out chopsticks, whatever's going on in that environment, I don't get to just learn chopsticks. I'm learning other stuff too. Values, attitudes, skills, sensibilities, knowledge. Mind, body, heart, spirit. See, think, do, say, make. I said there were 3 points. We're always learning, and we're always learning more than one thing at a time. I think there's just 2. The third part is really this, which is the shorthand way that we're going to use in this course for that is that learning is wild. Learning cannot be tamed. You guys, and some of you know this book, this image from Where the Wild Things Are, right? And some of you who really are into it might also know that it's probably a story really about a boy dealing with the things going on in his own head, that you can't turn that off. Even when we sleep. We're always learning We're always learning more than one thing at a time, and our shorthand for that is learning is wild. And if we can keep that in mind, it changes, for me, it has changed. The commitment to keep that in mind, present on the table, has changed the way that I think about education and the way that I worry and hope for the education that we're designing in schools. So that's why we start with it now. On your syllabus, it says that on Tuesday, you have an assignment due. It says the gingerbread kid. We're going to do that in class. Don't sweat it. Okay. You're also going to take it out of class and do a little more work, but we need to have some more conversation before we can actually get started on that. But what it says is my gingerbread kid, right? So if you do have a job between now and next Tuesday, there's a couple readings, Hawkins, right, called Living in Trees. And I think there's a treason, which is, on Lynn's page. These are about examples of learning, ways of thinking about the way that learning works. So I've said, what about learning? Don't go anywhere yet, because you do have one thing you need to do on the weekend besides the reading. So learning's wild. You're always learning more than one thing at a time. You're always learning, and you're always learning more than one thing at a time. And then over the weekend with the readings and then the lecture on Tuesday, it's like, so how does this work? Right? How does that fact, what does that look like, and how does it work? Now, so your homework is this. Pick a name. Pick a name for your child. Okay. It can be a MC rapper name if you want. It can be the name you have always kept locked in your heart that you're going to give your child. It could be the name of a deceased relative that you adore. It could be cute, funny, serious, whatever. It doesn't have to, you don't even, it could be androgynous. It could be like Chris, it could be a boy or a girl. Or it could be like, it could be gender or sex specific. But you got to pick a name. Because over the rest of the quarter, we're not going to be talking about education in abstract terms. We're going to talk about the education of your child, who's going to have a name. And your neighbor's child, who's also going to have a name. And you need to be ready for it, because we're going to be producing something in class on Tuesday. I'm going to be walking around at various times and taking your kids from you and putting them into various situations that you think would be good for them as real thought experiments. So you need to have a name that you're going to remember. Now, if you want to add section, you got to come up and figure out a way to sign up.